Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at the OnePlus 8 Pro and see how this phone holds up in 2022. Now what I can definitely tell you is something like the OnePlus 8 Pro is still a very interesting device because it's not super old, and this was, I think, one of the last pinnacle devices from OnePlus. I think the 7 Pro was kind of like a new beginning of their devices, and then they kind of flopped with OnePlus 9 and now the OnePlus 10 Pro. Marketing is really weird. So I think the 8 Pro was probably one of the last major phones OnePlus made that was still like a flagship of flagships. Now, if you want to pick up this phone or other phones I would recommend this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, with something like the OnePlus 8 Pro, what I'll definitely tell you is a phone like this is still a really good capable device for the most part. The software is a little weird, but the body of this phone still feels extremely premium. This thing has a beautiful 6.78-inch fluid AMOLED display. I don't know why they did a 0.78, but whatever. 120Hz panel as well, which is so good. 1440p. So with that being said, this panel is still extremely good and extremely sharp in this day and age. You have a hole punch display, which is really good, and you have very little bezel on the top and bottom. When this phone came out, about 2 years ago in 2020, it was probably one of my favorite phone designs of that time. I think the front of this phone looked beautiful, and it was almost like a perfect looking Galaxy S20 in a way. The S20 came out this time too, and I think this phone looked a little bit better because this phone had a beautiful front and a beautiful back. Now you have a USB Type-C port on this thing, which is beautiful, and you have the frosted glass back on this thing too, which, like I mentioned, this was one of my favorite things about this phone. Having that frosted glass back kind of future-proofed this phone in some ways. It didn't future-proof it in every way, but that was a very cool thing that OnePlus did at this time, and they didn't really do it before. We didn't really have it on majority of the OnePlus devices before, but we had it on this one, which really threw things off, and I was really happy about it. Now, luckily for us, the OnePlus 8 Pro finally brought IP certification. This is something that OnePlus should have brought in their devices 30 years ago, but they still didn't do it, and we actually did end up having that capability with this device, which was actually really cool. We did also have wireless charging and reverse wireless charging on this device too, and when I saw those things, the reverse wireless charging and wireless charging, and I saw that IP certification, I actually thought to myself that OnePlus was changing away from their ways. I was so happy with the way they were moving here, and then they eventually kind of tore it down when they went ahead and did the weirder decisions they made after, but this was a really smart move from OnePlus. I think the OnePlus 8 was a little bit of a weirder device. They kind of kept the same kind of design, not the design, but they kept the same kind of ways they were doing before from the other devices on this one. But I was really happy with the approach that OnePlus did. Now, weirdly enough, the cameras on this thing were actually kind of a big deal at this moment, mostly because they made some cool improvements, but they didn't at the same time. This thing on the back had a quadruple camera setup, so it had a 48 megapixel wide-angle lens, 8 megapixel telephoto lens, another 48 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, and then a 5 megapixel color filter camera, whatever that means. And they also had a 16 megapixel wide-angle lens on the. Now, what I can tell you about this specific phone is that, like I mentioned before, I think OnePlus could have done a little bit better by adding 4K at 60 on the front. I think that would have been killer. That would have been such a cool feature. Unfortunately, they didn't do 4K at 60 on the front, which many phones at that moment were already doing. The S20s, the iPhone 11s, the 11 Pros, 11 Pro Maxes, the S10s even. I feel like this phone could have done it, but whatever. But with this phone, it did have a pretty decent back camera, at least at that time. I think when it first came out, a big thing about it was that it had this X-ray camera thing, which kind of threw people off. It especially threw me off as well. And since then, we haven't really heard anything about it, but this was a pretty cool feature. I was happy OnePlus threw a feature like this in there. That was kind of like a novelty, but still, it wasn't really a crazy cool camera at that time. It was good when it first came out, like I mentioned, but it slowly became kind of an outdated camera, mostly because the Galaxy S20's cameras were so amazing. We had 8K capability on that camera, which was so cool. Without even having 4K at 60 on the front, that actually really threw me off, and I wasn't, happy about it at all. But when it comes down to me, I feel like OnePlus could have done a little bit better, but overall, I think something like this could have been, a better camera. And in 2022, this camera holds up kind of well, but the front camera is definitely not holding up too well in 2022. Now, moving on to the software, this is probably one of the more disappointing, factors of this phone. Since OnePlus's origination, they teamed up with CyanogenMod, and I was a humongous fan when this phone came out. When the OnePlus phone came out, having a device manufacturer team up with the custom ROM community was insane, and they eventually switched away from CyanogenMod, but people were still in love with OxygenOS, and slowly but surely I became obsessed with OxygenOS too, and I was a humongous fan of that specific device. Now, unfortunately, many years later, Oxygen OS has now transformed into whatever Color OS is now, or whatever they're doing now, and I'm not a fan of the way OnePlus is moving as a company, and I feel like at this moment, I was really happy, but now I'm just not super happy with this type of device, and I just think that's one thing we're kind of going to have to live with. I feel like, again, OnePlus could have done a better job. They didn't in terms of software, and now we're stuck in a situation where we're kind of looking back, and it's almost like the better days are behind us. It's kind of like a sad thing, but the best days of OnePlus, I think, are behind us, and I don't think they're probably going to come back to what they used to be now, to be honest, and it seems like it was a roller coaster. When it first came out, it was awesome, then it kind of dipped down, and I feel like around the OnePlus 7 Pro, they started taking up a lot more, market share, and now they kind of dipped down again, to be honest. But the OnePlus 8 Pro, I guess in terms of software, if you're willing to customize and stuff, it's good. I don't know too many people who are happy with the direction they're going right now, though, to be honest. Now, in terms of performance, we have that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside of it, with 8 gigs of RAM on the base model, and it does go up to 12 gigs of RAM, which is really nice. Now, in terms of performance as a whole, I think this phone's performance is still pretty good nowadays too. It's not a bad performing phone by any means. I think this phone, mixed in with 120 Hz, it just is a really, really strong performing phone for sure. And no matter what I say about this device, whether it's, maybe not the best in terms of software anymore or whatever, it has done a tremendous job in terms of the performance. But many, many phones from 2020, even 2019, still hold up extremely well. I think this 2-year period from beginning of 2019 with the S10s all the way up to even this phone and the iPhone 12s, kind of right before the iPhone 12s, I think that year and a half period was just crazy good phones that were just coming out non-stop, which was so amazing, and I was so happy about that. And the performance is still top tier. I mean, this is really on par with my Galaxy S20s as well. I don't really feel like my Galaxy S20s are slow or starting to age at all either, and I feel like they're only getting stronger and stronger. And with this device, the performance is still there. It really just comes down to the software. Are you a fan of the software, yes or no? Then that kind of comes up there, to be honest. But I think the performance of this phone is still top tier, and I'm a humongous fan of that for sure. So in terms of performance, covers it up there. Now, in terms of battery life, this is also, like I mentioned, one of my favorite things about this phone. 4,510 mAh battery, and that is a decent sized battery for this phone. I mean, that is a pretty big battery. You have wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, which is still really good. And like I mentioned, those are some awesome things to have on a device like this. When a phone first comes out, you don't want it to have a small size battery because it's only going to get smaller from there. But having a phone like this that has a really good sized battery immediately within it makes me such a humongous fan of it, and I'm for sure a huge fan of this specific battery. So when it comes down to it, I am a humongous fan of this battery life, and I'm happy that it has a reverse wireless charging inside of it as well. So to kind of be completely honest, I think the OnePlus 8 Pro is still a pretty good phone in 2022, but it does kind of make me feel a little weird sometimes, just because I feel like OnePlus could have done a better job with it. I feel like they could have done a couple better things here and there. It's not an ugly phone, it's not a bad phone, it's not a slow performing phone or anything, but I do feel like they could have done this a little bit better in my opinion. So I think phones that were probably a little bit better than this, I think the Google Pixel 6 and the 6 Pro would definitely be solid upgrades rather than this phone. I think the Galaxy S20 Plus is a really good phone that's better than this. I think if you want to go to a 12 Pro Max, go for it. That's also a pretty big phone. But I think this device, if you have it, by all means keep it. I think a lot of people are going to be happy about this device too. But I feel like just, as a fan, I feel like OnePlus could have probably done a little bit of a better job in my opinion. So that kind of covers it up there. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.